Preparation for the United Nations Association's Test of English.
Background information. The United Nations Charter, references to enemy states. Articles 53, 77, 1, and 77 present the legal evidence that allegedly underpin the UN's institutional bias against the Axis powers, including Japan.
Question 1. Reportedly, the UN Charter still reflects the strong discriminatory sentiment that once prevailed among the countries allied against their common enemies during World War II. Explain what is meant in these discriminatory provisions, known as the enemy state clauses.
This essay consists of 5 paragraphs. 1. The Axis powers of World War II. 2. Article 53. 3. Article 77, 1. 4. Article 107. 5. Anachronistic and obsolete.
1. The Axis powers of World War II. The UN Charter refers to the enemy state, the Axis powers of World War II, at 3 different parts. Article 53, in the context of Chapter 7, Regional Arrangements. Article 77, Chapter 12, International Trusteeship System, and Article 107, Chapter 17, Transitional Security Arrangement.
2. Article 53. Article 53 legitimizes collective punitive measures against countries aggressively challenging international peace and security, provided that the Security Council authorizes such measures. The same article, however, waives this condition when punitive measures are aimed at any of the former enemy states. One important implication is that the UN is rather lenient on the measures against the Axis powers, limiting its own capacity to restrain excessive measures against them.
3. Article 77, 1. According to Article 77, 1, the UN trusteeship system administers, among others, those territories that may be detached from the Axis powers at the end of World War II. In other words, the former enemies were to transfer the administrative authorities over their colonial territories to the international community. Let us recall that at the end of the war, the Axis powers lost all of its overseas territories.
4. Article 107. Article 107 refers to the post-World War II transition, presenting exceptions to the provisions of the UN Charter, most importantly, the prohibition of the use of force, Article 2.4, which may arguably imply that any UN member states would be able to launch a preemptive measures against the Axis powers without an authorization of the Security Council.
5. Anachronistic and obsolete. These provisions, however, may not apply to the states in Africa and Asia that did not participate in World War II as a member of the Allies nations. In any case, while being aware that the enemy state clauses are anachronistic and obsolete, the international community has failed to delete these clauses for various reasons.
Question 2. Explain the historical background and process of the insertion of the enemy state clauses into the UN Charter.
This essay consists of 6 paragraphs. 1. London Declaration. 2. Atlantic Charter. 3. Declaration of United Nations. 4. Declaration of the 4 Nations on General Security. 5. Article 107 and Amp. Article 53. 6. Axis powers are enemy states. 1. London Declaration. End June 1941, the Great Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, together with the 8 European governments in exile Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Greece, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland and Yugoslavia, as well as Free France, held the first inter-allied meeting against the Axis powers, Germany and Italy. They then issued what was known as the London Declaration. expressing the commitment to cooperation against their common enemies and the shared vision for a post-war world order.
2. Atlantic Charter. In August 1941, Britain Prime Minister Churchill and US President Roosevelt laid out their vision for a post-war world order, which soon became known as the Atlantic Charter. The envisaged world order also contained the distinction between peace-loving states, the Allied powers, and enemy states, the Axis powers.
3. Declaration of United Nations. In December 1941, the Declaration of United Nations was drafted at the White House. It was the first occasion that President Roosevelt used the term United Nations to describe the Allied countries. And Prime Minister Churchill accepted it. In January 1942, the declaration, substantively very similar to the Atlantic Charter, was made available for the Allied countries to sign. Consequently, 26 governments signed the declaration as its original signatories. By this time, their enemies had meant to be the tripartite pact members, including Japan that had attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii.
4. Declaration of the Four Nations on General Security. By the time of the 1943 wartime conferences, U.S. President Roosevelt had strongly advocated a future international organization to replace the League of Nations. It was during the Moscow Conference of Foreign Ministries held in October and November of the year that the Soviet Union finally came to agree on such an organization. The Declaration of the Four Nations on General Security, signed by the US, UK, Soviet and China, recognized the necessity of establishing a general international organization based on the principle of sovereign equality of all peace-loving states.
5. Article 107 and Article 53. In the autumn of 1944, the four nations met in Washington, D.C. and prepared a draft charter of the future world organization, which contained an enemy state clause for the post-war transitional provisions. This clause was adopted unchanged as Article 107 at the UN conference at San Francisco in April 1945. Similarly, France and the Soviet Union took the initiative, attaching a special provision to the regulation of enforcement measures by regional agencies in Article 53 of the Charter.
6. Axis powers are enemy states. Before the end of World War II, or more accurately the 1945 San Francisco Conference, every country wishing to join the UN had to be a signatory of the Declaration of United Nations. In fact, the process of joining the UN entailed 21 additional governments such as those in Latin America, apart from the 26 original signatories, pledged to declare the Axis powers as enemies.
Question 3. Explain Japan's efforts to delete the enemy state clauses, particularly Article 107 and Article 53, from the UN Charter.
This essay consists of 4 paragraphs. 1. Embarrassing relic. 2. Delete the enemy state. 3. Revisions of the Charter. 4. Put on the shelf.
1. Embarrassing relic. Many observers in Japan have long regarded the enemy state clauses in the UN Charter as an embarrassing relic for their country as well as for the international organization itself. Indeed, many argue that the UN should shed its image of an institutional manifestation of the victorious Allied powers. They also stress that the required amendments should be done in such a way that the organization can ensure a level playing field for all member states and their people in both name and substance.
2. Delete the enemy state. Japan began to demand the removal of the enemy state clauses in the 1990s, following the end of the Cold War. Their efforts have resulted so far in 2 General Assembly resolutions, R. 49, 58, in 1994 and R. 50, 52, in 1995. These resolutions presented very similar texts, calling for, among others, the UN's intention to initiate the procedure to delete the enemy state from Articles 53, 77 and 107, In both cases, the adoption was nearly unanimous with no country casting a negative vote. But one abstention, North Korea, for the earlier resolution, and 3 abstentions, Cuba, North Korea and Libya, for the latter.
3. Revisions of the Charter. The enemy state clauses, however, have remained intact, as any charter revision would require a set of cumbersome procedure, i.e., the adoption at minimum by 2/3 of the UN members, followed by the ratification also by 2/3, including the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The fear is that the removal of the enemy state clauses might prompt a host of demand for more controversial revisions of the Charter, including the institutional changes of the Security Council.
4. Put on the shelf. In retrospect, the proposed deletion of the enemy state clauses has been put on the shelf since the mid-1990s. One way to expedite the process would be to delink the issue from the other more controversial ones that also require the Charter's revision. But such delinking is far from easy. In any case, the task of removing the enemy clauses may have to wait until agreement on more substantive issues is reached.
The bigger the organization and the longer the history, the harder it is to make small changes. Thank you for watching. Have a good one. Cheers.